The town of Ravenswood, nestled on the edge of the forest, was a place of whispered legends and hushed warnings. Among the townsfolk, the asylum was a topic best avoided, but for a group of teenagers, the lure of the unknown proved too tantalizing to resist. "Come on, it'll be fun," urged Jake, the de facto leader of the group. His flashlight beam wavered as he spoke, casting eerie shadows on the faces of his friends. "I don't know, Jake. My grandma always said that place was cursed," replied Sarah, her voice tinged with unease. "She's right," chimed in Mark, adjusting the straps of his backpack. "I heard people went missing there." "Exactly," Jake grinned. "That's why we have to check it out. Think of the stories we'll have." Reluctantly, Sarah and Mark followed Jake through the forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. As they approached the asylum, a chill settled over them, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay. The entrance loomed before them, an open maw waiting to swallow them whole. With a final glance at each other, they stepped inside. The interior was a labyrinth of shadowy corridors and decaying rooms. The walls, stained with mold and time, seemed to close in around them. As they ventured deeper, the oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of their own breathing. "Let's split up," Jake suggested, his excitement undimmed by the growing sense of dread. "We'll cover more ground that way." "Are you crazy?" Sarah protested. "We should stick together." "Relax, we'll be fine," Jake insisted. "We'll meet back here in 10 minutes. Reluctantly, Sarah and Mark agreed, and the trio parted ways. As Sarah wandered through the darkened halls, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her flashlight flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of long-abandoned rooms. In the depths of the asylum, the patients stirred, sensing the presence of new prey. A twisted smile crept across their face as they rose from their lair, their movements eerily silent. Sarah's heart raced as she turned a corner, only to find herself face to face with a figure shrouded in shadows. Before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth, and she was dragged into the darkness. The patient reveled in the terror that radiated from their captive. They remembered the cruel experiments, the searing pain, and the relentless torment they had endured. Now it was their turn to inflict suffering. Sarah was thrown into a small, dimly lit room, the air thick with the smell of rot and decay. The patient's eyes glinted with sadistic delight as they approached her, a rusted surgical tray in hand, laden with instruments of torture. "Please, no," Sarah begged, her voice trembling with fear. "Let me go." But the patient was deaf to her pleas. They selected a scalpel, its blade dull and jagged, and approached her with deliberate slowness. Sarah struggled against her bonds, but it was futile. The patient's grip was ironclad, their eyes filled with a maniacal glee. With a swift motion, the scalpel sliced into Sarah's flesh, the dull edge tearing through skin and muscle. Her screams echoed through the asylum, a symphony of agony that only seemed to fuel the patient's frenzy. Blood flowed freely, staining the floor in a pool of crimson. The patient worked methodically, their actions driven by a macabre creativity born of madness. They carved intricate patterns into Sarah's skin, each cut a testament to their rage and torment. Limbs were severed with surgical precision, the bones snapping under the force of the patient's hands. Flesh was torn from bone, the sound a sickening rip that echoed through the room. Sarah's eyes were wide with terror, her body convulsing with pain. The patient paused, their head tilted as if listening to some unheard melody. They selected a pair of rusty pliers from the tray, the metal glinting in the dim light. With a twisted smile, the patient approached Sarah once more. They gripped her fingers with the pliers, the metal teeth digging into her flesh. With a slow, deliberate motion, they began to pull, the tendons snapping and tearing as they wrenched each digit from its socket. Sarah's screams reached a fever pitch, her voice raw and broken. The patient reveled in her torment, their laughter a chilling counterpoint to her cries. They moved on to her toes, the pliers working with the same gruesome precision, each pull a symphony of agony. The patient's hands were slick with blood, their excitement growing with each new act of cruelty. They selected a bone saw, its teeth jagged and rusted, and approached Sarah's legs. The saw bit into her flesh, the teeth grinding against bone with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc, staining the walls and pooling on the floor. Sarah's mind began to fracture, the pain overwhelming her senses. Her vision blurred, the room spinning in a dizzying whirl of shadows and blood. The patient's laughter echoed through the asylum, a haunting melody that seemed to seep into the very walls. When the patient was done, there was little left to recognize. Sarah had become the latest victim in a long line of horrors, her life extinguished in a symphony of pain. Her body was a grotesque tapestry of wounds, each cut and tear a testament to the patient's twisted artistry. The patient stepped back, admiring their handiwork with a sense of grim satisfaction. Blood dripped from their hands, pooling at their feet in a macabre puddle. They turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Sarah's mutilated body as a gruesome warning to any who dared to enter the asylum. Jake and Mark, unaware of her fate, continued their exploration, blissfully ignorant of the horror unfolding nearby. The asylum, once a place of healing, had become a lair of nightmares, its walls echoing with the cries of the damned. The following morning, the town of Ravenswood was abuzz with the news of the missing teenagers. Sheriff Daniels, a stern and seasoned lawman, took charge of the investigation. The forest and the asylum were places he knew well, their dark history etched into his memory. "Last seen heading towards the old asylum," Daniels muttered, glancing at the map spread out on his desk. "Damn fools!" He gathered his team, a group of officers who had seen their fair share of strange occurrences in the town. Among them was Detective Miller, a sharp-minded investigator with a knack for uncovering the truth. "We're heading to the asylum," Daniels announced. "I want a thorough search. If those kids are in there, we're bringing them home." As the police convoy made its way through the forest, the sense of foreboding grew. The asylum loomed ahead, a silent sentinel watching over the depths of the woods. Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far worse than they could imagine. Meanwhile, in a nearby town, journalist Emily Carter had caught wind of the story. Known for her tenacity and determination, she saw the disappearance of the teenagers as an opportunity to uncover a bigger story. An abandoned asylum, missing kids. There's something here, she mused, packing her camera and notebook. Time to find out what. Emily arrived in Ravenswood just as the police began their search. She watched from a distance. Her curiosity piqued. When the officers entered the asylum, she followed, careful to remain unseen. Inside the asylum, the police spread out, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and every creak of the floorboards set their nerves on edge. "Stay alert," Daniels warned. "This place is a maze." As Emily crept through the corridors, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her camera flashed, capturing images of the derelict interior. But her focus shifted when she heard a faint noise, a whisper of movement in the shadows. Driven by curiosity, Emily ventured deeper into the asylum, unaware that she was walking into the patient's lair. The patient, drawn by the scent of fresh prey, watched from the darkness, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. Emily's flashlight flickered as she reached a room at the end of the hall. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the blood-stained walls and the remnants of what had once been a human being. Before she could react, a hand closed around her ankle, and she was dragged into the darkness. The patient's laughter echoed through the halls as they began their gruesome work once more. Emily was thrown into a dank, windowless room, the stench of rot and mold assaulting her senses. Chains clinked as they were fastened around her wrists and ankles, binding her to a rusting metal table. Her heart pounded in her chest, the cold bite of fear settling deep in her bones. The patient approached, their eyes glinting with unholy glee. They laid out an array of torture instruments on a nearby tray, each one stained with the blood of previous victims. Emily's eyes widened in terror as she recognized the tools. Saws, scalpels, pliers, and other implements designed to inflict maximum pain. "Please, no," she whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "Don't do this." But the patient merely smiled, a grotesque parody of compassion. They selected a scalpel, its blade cruelly sharp, and began their work. The first cut was shallow, a mere graze across her forearm, but it was enough to make Emily scream. The patient relished the sound, savoring it like a fine wine. They continued, each incision deeper and more vicious than the last. Blood flowed freely, pooling on the table and dripping to the floor. Emily's screams echoed through the asylum, a symphony of agony that only seemed to fuel the patient's sadistic delight. The patient paused, their head cocked as if listening to some unheard melody. They selected a pair of pliers from the tray, the metal gleaming wickedly in the dim light. With a cruel smile, they grasped Emily's fingers, one by one, and began to pull. The sound of snapping tendons and cracking bone filled the air, mingling with Emily's tortured cries. Each finger was wrenched from its socket, the pain blinding in its intensity. The patient moved on to her toes, their movements precise and methodical. Emily's vision blurred with tears, her body convulsing with each new wave of torment. But the patient was far from finished. They picked up a bone saw, its teeth jagged and rusted, and approached Emily's legs. The saw bit into her flesh, the sound of grinding bone and tearing muscle, a sickening symphony. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc, staining the walls and pooling on the floor. Emily's mind began to fracture, the pain overwhelming her senses. Her vision blurred, the room spinning in a dizzying whirl of shadows and blood. The patient's laughter echoed through the asylum, a haunting melody that seemed to seep into the very walls. With a twisted sense of artistry, the patient selected a branding iron from the tray, its tip glowing red-hot. They pressed it against Emily's skin, the searing heat burning through flesh and muscle. The stench of charred flesh filled the room, mingling with Emily's screams in a grotesque duet. Next came the acid. The patient poured it slowly, savoring each drop as it hissed and bubbled upon contact with Emily's skin. The acid ate through her flesh, leaving deep, smoking craters. The pain was unlike anything Emily had ever experienced, a relentless wave of agony that threatened to drown her. The patient's hands were slick with blood, their excitement growing with each new act of cruelty. They selected a scalpel, its blade cruelly sharp, and began to peel away layers of skin, revealing the raw, bloody muscle beneath. Emily's screams reached a fever pitch, her voice raw and broken. The patient was an artist in their own right, each cut and tear a brushstroke on the canvas of Emily's suffering. They worked with a macabre precision, their hands steady and sure. Flesh was flayed from bone, tendons were severed, and nerves were exposed to the cold air. Finally, mercifully, Emily's body could take no more. Her screams faded to a whimper, her vision dimming to black. The patient stepped back, admiring their handiwork with a sense of grim satisfaction. Blood dripped from their hands, pooling at their feet in a macabre puddle. They turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Emily's mutilated body as a gruesome warning to any who dared to enter the asylum. Detective Miller was the first to find the grisly remains of the second victim. Her heart sank as she surveyed the scene, the brutality of the killing leaving no doubt that they were dealing with something far beyond the ordinary. "Daniels, we have a problem," she radioed, her voice steady despite the horror before her. "We need to get everyone out of here." But it was too late. The patient, driven by an insatiable hunger for blood, was already hunting their next victim. The disappearance of the teenagers and the journalist had thrown the town of Ravenswood into a state of panic. Sheriff Daniels, a seasoned and stoic lawman, was determined to solve the case and bring justice to the victims. The grisly scene discovered by Detective Miller had only intensified the urgency of the investigation. "All right, listen up," Daniels addressed his team in the makeshift command center, set up near the asylum. "We're dealing with a monster here. This isn't just some lunatic. This is someone or something with a taste for blood. We need to find them before more lives are lost." Detective Miller, a sharp-minded and relentless investigator, had been combing through old records and files about the asylum. She uncovered disturbing details about the facility's past, including the brutal treatments and experiments conducted on patients. "Daniels, you need to see this," Miller said, spreading out a collection of yellow documents and photographs on the table. The asylum was shut down after numerous reports of abuse and unethical experiments. Many of the patients were subjected to electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and other horrific procedures. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he scanned the documents. "And you think one of those patients is responsible for this?" "It's a strong possibility," Miller replied. "There's one name that keeps coming up: Isaac Turner. He was a patient here who underwent some of the worst treatments. When the asylum was closed, he was apparently left behind. It's possible he's been hiding here all these years, driven mad by what was done to him." "All right," Daniel said, his voice grim. "We need to find Turner and stop him. I want a full search of the asylum. No one goes in alone. We stick together and we take him down." The team of officers moved through the asylum with caution, their flashlights piercing the oppressive darkness. The air was thick with tension, every creak and groan of the building setting their nerves on edge. Detective Miller led the way, her instincts sharp. She paused outside a door, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. "I think he's in here," she whispered to Daniels. The door creaked open, revealing a room that seemed untouched by time. The walls were covered in crude drawings and symbols, scrawled in what appeared to be blood. A makeshift altar stood in the center, adorned with bones and other macabre trophies. As they moved deeper into the room, a figure lunged from the shadows, a flash of metal glinting in the dim light. The officers reacted swiftly, their guns trained on the attacker. But Isaac Turner was not easily subdued. He moved with a feral agility, his eyes wild and filled with rage. A struggle ensued, the room filled with the sounds of shouting and gunfire. Turner fought with a strength born of madness, his movements erratic and unpredictable. He managed to overpower one of the officers, dragging them into the darkness with a maniacal laugh. The officers' screams echoed through the asylum, a chilling reminder of the horrors that awaited those who crossed Turner's path. The team pursued, their determination unwavering. Turner dragged the officer, Officer Jacobs, into his lair, a hidden room deep within the bowels of the asylum. The air was suffocating, thick with the stench of decay and blood. The walls were lined with tools of torture, each one meticulously arranged, gleaming ominously in the dim light. Turner's eyes gleamed with sadistic delight as he selected a pair of rusty pliers, his mind already envisioning the horrific acts he would soon perform. Jacob struggled desperately, his eyes wide with terror, but Turner's grip was ironclad. With a twisted smile, Turner began his gruesome work, starting with the pliers. He clamped them around Jacob's fingers, the metal teeth biting into the flesh. "Please, no!" Jacob screamed, his voice echoing through the asylum's empty halls. Turner ignored his pleas, pulling the pliers with a slow, deliberate motion. The sound of snapping tendons and cracking bone filled the air, mingling with Jacobs's tortured cries. Each finger was wrenched from its socket with brutal precision, the pain blinding in its intensity. Turner's eyes sparkled with glee as he moved on into the next set of tools. He selected a scalpel, its blade cruelly sharp, and began to carve into Jacob's flesh. The cuts were deep and methodical, creating intricate patterns that revealed the raw muscle and sinew beneath. Blood flowed freely, pooling on the table and dripping to the floor in a macabre symphony of agony. Jacob's screams grew louder, his body convulsing with each new wave of torment. Turner was an artist in his own right, each cut and tear a brushstroke on the canvas of Jacob's suffering. He worked with a macabre precision, his hands steady and sure. Turner's next choice was a bone saw, its teeth jagged and rusted. He positioned it over Jacob's leg, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The saw bit into the flesh, the sound of grinding bone and tearing muscle a sickening symphony. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc, staining the walls and pooling on the floor. The pain was overwhelming, and Jacob's vision blurred with tears. His mind began to fracture, each moment a relentless wave of agony that threatened to drown him. Turner's laughter echoed through the room, a haunting melody that seemed to seep into the very walls. With a twisted sense of artistry, Turner selected a branding iron from the tray, its tip glowing red-hot. He pressed it against Jacob's chest, the searing heat burning through flesh and muscle. The stench of charred flesh filled the room, mingling with Jacob's screams in a grotesque duet. Next came the acid. Turner poured it slowly, savoring each drop as it hissed and bubbled upon contact with Jacob's skin. The acid ate through his flesh, leaving deep, smoking craters. The pain was unlike anything Jacobs had ever experienced, a relentless wave of agony that seemed to go on forever. Turner's hands were slick with blood, his excitement growing with each new act of cruelty. He selected a scalpel, its blade cruelly sharp, and began to peel away layers of skin, revealing the raw, bloody muscle beneath. Jacob's screams reached a fever pitch, his voice raw and broken. Turner was far from finished. He picked up a pair of forceps and began to extract Jacob's teeth one by one, savoring the sound of cracking enamel and the sight of blood spurting from the fresh wounds. Jacob's cries grew weaker, his body trembling with pain and fear. Turner's final act was one of ultimate brutality. He selected a large serrated knife and plunged it into Jacob's abdomen, twisting it with savage force. Blood and viscera spilled out, the smell of death thick in the air. Jacob's eyes widened in horror, his life slipping away as Turner continued to mutilate his body. When Turner was done, Jacobs was barely recognizable. His body was a grotesque tapestry of wounds, each cut and tear a testament to Turner's twisted artistry. Blood dripped from Turner's hands, pooling at his feet in a macabre puddle. He stepped back, admiring his handiwork with a sense of grim satisfaction. The asylum was silent once more, the echoes of Jacob's screams lingering in the air. Turner vanished into the shadows, leaving the mutilated body as a gruesome warning to any who dared to enter his domain. The remaining officers, led by Sheriff Daniels and Detective Miller, advanced with grim determination. They followed the trail of blood and terror, their resolve stealing with each step. Turner's lair was a labyrinth of shadows and horrors, but they pressed on, driven by a need to end the nightmare. The air was thick with tension as they moved deeper into the asylum. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant whisper, set their nerves on edge. The building seemed to come alive around them, its walls echoing with the cries of the damned. "We stick together," Daniels reminded his team, his voice a steady anchor in the midst of chaos. "No one goes off alone." The team nodded, their expressions grim. They knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. They had to stop Turner before more lives were lost. As they approached Turner's lair, the air grew colder, the stench of decay nearly overwhelming. The walls were lined with crude drawings and symbols scrawled in blood. A makeshift altar stood in the center, adorned with bones and other macabre trophies. Turner awaited them, his eyes gleaming with a crazed fury. His body was covered in scars, a testament to the brutal treatments he had endured. He held a blood-stained knife in one hand, his grip tight and unwavering. "You shouldn't have come here," Turner growled, his voice a guttural snarl. "This is my domain." Daniel stepped forward, his gun trained on Turner. "It's over, Turner. We're taking you in." Turner's laughter echoed through the room, a chilling sound that sent shivers down their spines. "You think you can stop me? I've been here for years, feeding on the fear and pain. You're just another meal." The final confrontation erupted in a blur of violence. Turner lunged at the officers with a feral agility, his movements erratic and unpredictable. Daniels and Miller coordinated their efforts, their training and experience guiding them through the chaos. Turner fought with a strength born of madness, his attacks savage and unrelenting. He slashed at the officers with his knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. Blood sprayed in crimson arcs, staining the walls and floor. Daniels managed to disarm Turner, but the struggle was far from over. Turner's hands were like iron, his grip unbreakable. He lunged at Daniels, his eyes wild with rage. But Miller intervened, delivering a swift and powerful blow that sent Turner sprawling. Turner recovered quickly, his movements eerily fluid. He grabbed a nearby piece of broken glass, using it as a makeshift weapon. The officers circled him, their guns trained on his every move. "Stay down, Turner!" Miller shouted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Turner ignored her, his mind consumed by fury. He lunged at Miller, the glass shard aimed at her throat. She sidestepped the attack, her training kicking in. With a swift motion, she disarmed him, the glass falling to the floor with a sharp clink. Turner roared in frustration, his eyes blazing with fury. He grabbed a nearby officer, using them as a human shield. The officer struggled, but Turner's grip was ironclad. "Let him go, Turner!" Daniels demanded, his gun trained on Turner's head. Turner's laughter echoed through the room, a chilling sound that sent shivers down their spines. "You think you can stop me? I've been here for years, feeding on the fear and pain. You're just another meal." Miller's mind raced, searching for a way to end the standoff. She noticed a rusted chain hanging from the ceiling, a relic of the asylum's grim past. With a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed the chain and swung it at Turner, the metal links wrapping around his neck. Turner's grip loosened, and the officer broke free. Daniels seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful blow to Turner's head. Turner staggered, his eyes unfocused, but he wasn't done yet. With a final, desperate lunge, Turner attacked Daniels, his hands reaching for the sheriff's throat. Daniels fought back fiercely, his training guiding his movements. He managed to overpower Turner, slamming him to the ground with a force that shook the room. Turner lay on the floor, his body battered and broken. Blood pooled around him, staining the floor in a macabre testament to the violence that had unfolded. His eyes were wide with rage, but the fight was finally leaving him. "It's over, Turner," Daniel said, his voice steady. "You're done." Turner's laughter was weak, a shadow of its former self. "You think this ends with me? The asylum. It's a part of me. It will never let you go." Daniels and Miller exchanged a glance, the weight of Turner's words settling over them. They knew the asylum's dark presence would linger, a shadow that would haunt them for years to come. As they secured Turner in handcuffs, the remaining officers moved through the lair, documenting the horrors they found. The walls were covered in blood and viscera, the remnants of Turner's victims, a grim reminder of the darkness that had taken root in the asylum. Isaac Turner was taken into custody, his reign of terror finally at an end. The town of Ravenswood slowly began to heal, the shadow of the asylum's dark past gradually lifting. But the scars remained, a reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within those walls. The townspeople gathered at the edge of the forest, watching as the police convoy emerged from the trees, transporting Turner to a secure facility. Whispers of relief and fear mingled in the air, the weight of the ordeal etched into their faces. Sheriff Daniels and Detective Miller stood at the edge of the forest, the asylum looming behind them. The building seemed to sigh in relief, its dark secrets finally exposed to the light. "Do you think it's really over?" Miller asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Daniels sighed, his gaze fixed on the crumbling facade of the asylum. "For now," he replied, "but some evils never truly die. They just wait in the shadows, biding their time." As they walked away, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echoes of cries long silenced. The asylum stood as a testament to the darkness that lurked within the human soul, a place where nightmares were born and horrors were made flesh. In the following days, a team of forensic experts and historians descended upon the asylum, meticulously documenting the horrors that had taken place within its walls. They uncovered hidden rooms, secret passages, and long-forgotten records that painted a chilling picture of the facility's dark history. The media descended upon Ravenswood, their cameras and microphones capturing the town's collective trauma. Stories of the missing teenagers, the journalist, and the brave officers who had faced Turner filled the airwaves, a grim reminder of the evil that had festered in the heart of the forest. The town held a memorial service for the victims, their names etched into a stone monument in the town square. Families and friends gathered to mourn and remember, their grief mingling with a sense of relief that the nightmare was finally over. Sheriff Daniels and Detective Miller attended the service, their presence a symbol of the town's resilience. As they stood before the monument, Daniels placed a hand on Miller's shoulder, his voice steady. "We did good, Miller. We brought him down." Miller nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "But the asylum, it's still there. The darkness isn't gone." Daniels looked back at the forest, the shadows deepening as the sun dipped below the horizon. "No," he agreed, "but we'll be ready. Whatever comes next, we'll be ready." As the town began to rebuild, the asylum remained a haunting presence on the edge of the forest. Plans were made to demolish the building, to erase the physical reminder of the horrors that had taken place. But some wondered if destroying the asylum would truly banish the darkness, or if it would simply shift to another form. In the quiet of the night, when the wind whispered through the trees, the townspeople could still hear the faint echoes of cries long silenced. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next chapter in its dark history. Sheriff Daniels and Detective Miller continued their work, the weight of the asylum's legacy a constant presence in their minds. They knew that the darkness would never be fully gone, but they also knew that they had the strength to face it. One evening, as Daniels sat in his office, a knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Miller standing there, her expression unreadable. "Got a minute?" she asked. Daniels nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Miller took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Daniels'. "I've been thinking about the asylum, about what Turner said, that it would never let us go." Daniels leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that too. The asylum has a way of getting under your skin, but we can't let it control us." Miller nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I know, but I think we need to understand it better, to make sure we're prepared for whatever comes next." Daniels considered her words, a sense of pride swelling within him. "You're right. We need to be ready." Together, they began to compile a comprehensive report on the asylum, documenting its dark history and the events that had unfolded. They reached out to experts in the field of paranormal research, seeking to understand the deeper forces at play. As they delved deeper into the asylum's past, they uncovered stories of otherworldly phenomena, ghostly apparitions, unexplained noises, and a sense of malevolent presence that seemed to linger in the air. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the asylum's darkness was not just a product of human cruelty, but something far more ancient and sinister. Months passed, and the town of Ravenswood slowly began to heal. The asylum was demolished, the land cleared for new development, but the memories lingered, a permanent scar on the collective consciousness of the town. Sheriff Daniels and Detective Miller continued their work, their bonds strengthened by the trials they had faced together. They knew that the darkness would never be fully gone, but they also knew that they had the strength to face it. And in the quiet of the night, when the wind whispered through the trees, they could still hear the faint echoes of cries long silenced. The forest held its secrets close, ever watchful, ever waiting. As the seasons changed, the town of Ravenswood remained vigilant, its people forever marked by the horrors they had endured. The legacy of the asylum was a reminder of the darkness that lurked within the human soul, a darkness that could never be fully banished, but could be faced with courage and resolve. In the end, it was not the destruction of the asylum that brought peace, but the strength and unity of the town. Together, they faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their spirits unbroken by the horrors of the past. And so, the story of Ravenswood became one of resilience and hope, a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure even the darkest of nights. Thank you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button, and we'll notify you when the next story comes out.